Okay, everyone, in the interest of time, I'm going to get started, and I hope everyone finds a seat and gets ready and settled in for the day. I'd like to welcome you all to the 10th Annual Symposium of the Education Partnership for Internationalizing Curriculum, or EPIC. At least I did the numbers, and I think it's a 10th anniversary, so that's what I'm going to stick by. I'm Kate Kuhns, Director of the Stanford Global Studies Division, and on behalf of our 4 Title VI centers, I would like to welcome you, in addition to our colleagues from the Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education, or SPICE, the Center for the Study of Spatial and Textual Analysis, or CESTA, the Center for the Study of Education and Teaching, or CSET, and the Global Educators Network, or GEN. And I also want to ask you to hold on to your metaphorical hats because there's going to be a lot of acronyms in my introduction. Stanford has absolutely embraced the idea of acronyms or verbal shortcuts, so I apologize. I will try and do my best to define everything for you. A little bit of housekeeping as well. The restrooms are through those doors across the atrium. There you'll find them. There's no smoking in the building or out on the arcade. And we are going to be filming the entire session today for our YouTube channel. And we've also invited our photographer to come to help take and record memories for the day. So just wanted to make that announcement. And also before we begin, I want to take a moment and acknowledge that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship with Native peoples. So let me start by asking, what is Stanford Global Studies, or our first acronym, SGS? SGS is a division comprised of 14 area study centers and programs, and is Stanford's hub for teaching and research related to global issues. Embedded in the fabric of Stanford's overall mission for a purposeful university is our commitment to engaging with partners beyond our campus to learn from and give back to our community. As part of that commitment, one of our highest priorities at SGS is outreach that promotes global education and cross-cultural learning. Through our outreach programs, we share resources and expertise with students and educators in the community that deepens the understanding of key regions, cultures, languages, and global issues. And then the next question is, what is Title IV? It's not necessarily an acronym, but it's a verbal shortcut, I would say. Title VI is one of the Department of Education's many programs that is aimed at promoting global and cross-cultural education. Every 4 years, there's a competition for the designation of National Resource Center, or NRC. And I am pleased to share that SGS is home to 4 NRCs: the Center for East Asian Studies, or CEAS, the Center for Latin American Studies, or CLAS, the Center for Russian, East European, Eurasian Studies, or CREAS. And I'm also happy to share that for the first time, SGS received NRC designation for a global national resource center. So we're very proud of that. Thank you. A lot of hard work, and I have to give credit to Kristen for really helping us with that. And yes, we all deserve to give a round of applause to Kristen, who is sitting right there. Please stand. It's a little early in my introduction, but please, stand up. There you go. There you go. We would not be here without Kristen. I think we all recognize that, right? Okay. One of the mandates for being so designated an NRC is to promote the internationalization of curricula, and all of this is what allows us to convene here today. In 2013, our NRCs established the Education Partnership for Internationalizing Curriculum, or EPIC, which offers a range of dynamic programs for community college and K-12 educators and students that foster global competencies. Students and educators from more than 115 institutions around the country have participated in our EPIC programs. Under the EPIC umbrella, we organized several programs. In 2014, we began the EPIC Community College Fellows Program, and our latest cohort fellows are here in the audience today. We're very happy to host you. And 2 years ago, we started our EPIC Leadership Program, and I see Angela here, who's a alum from last year of our EPIC Leaders Program, which we began in the effort to help institutionalize global curriculum changes at community colleges. We're also happy to support the Global Educators Network, and I see Scott here, who's a leader in that effort, as well as, where's Marina? There's Marina. There we go. So you're going to have a chance to meet our Gen Fellows, I believe, at lunch, over the lunch hour. I would like to also, so this is the part where I was planning to give formal thanks to folks, because it's very important. We could not do this without our partners. First and foremost, I have to thank Gary and Jonas at the Stanford Program in International and Cross-Cultural Education. So there, I see Jonas, there's Gary right there. So thank you all very much. Also, the Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis Fellows. I see Nelson, Ellis, and I don't know if Faiza is here yet. Not yet, okay. But thank you to all of you for also being very dedicated partners with us. We have the Center for the Study of Education and Teaching, or CSET, and I saw Tammy is here with us today. Tammy is involved with the leadership program. Thank you. And of course, again, I want to express gratitude to the dedicated staff and faculty across Stanford who support these initiatives and continue to innovate how we extend our reach beyond Stanford. I want to thank Stephanie Pitkevitz, our communications manager, Nora Khalid, who I see, who is helping us today, Julie Tatsukawa, who couldn't be here, who was very helpful, and again, the wonderful Kristen Hara, who took the lead in organizing the symposium as she's done for the last 3 years, I believe, as well as our Community College Student Engagement Fair, as well as so many other various programs. So thank you, Kristen, for everything that you do. I don't think you get enough recognition. So a brief overview of the EPIC Symposium, and again, this is where I'm going to throw a lot of statistics at you, but I'm very proud, and I think we all are very proud of these statistics. The symposium is the culminating event in our year-long EPIC Fellowship Program. Over the last 9 years, the symposium has grown both in size and geographically. To date, more than 450 participants have attended 8 EPIC symposia, and more than 90 community college faculty from 44 institutions have participated in our fellowship programs. EPIC Fellows have represented over 35 academic disciplines and reached hundreds of thousands of students across the country. So thank you to all of our EPIC Fellows who are here today and also the alums who are joining us. And now, without any greater further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, who we're very, very happy to be hosting, Professor Grant Parker. Professor Parker is the interim director of the Stanford Global Studies Division and an associate professor of classics. He joined Stanford from Duke in 2006. At Stanford, he teaches Latin, as well as topics linked to the exotic and geographic elements of Roman imperial culture. His book, The Making of Roman India, was published in 2008, while new projects have addressed ancient travel literature as well as Rome's Egyptian obelisks. His interest in classical reception is reflected in his 2001 book, The Agony of Asar, critical edition of a former slave's defense of slavery, written in Latin and published in Leiden in 1742. And Grant, for this year and in past years, has been a wonderful supporter of all of our efforts. For instance, he gave a talk at the EPIC Faculty Fellows meeting, so many of you are already familiar with Grant. He just finished a SPICE Scholars Corner that was focusing on heritage, and right now he's collaborating with the Stanford History Education Group, which has now been renamed the Digital Information Group, I believe, DIG, to develop a world history curriculum on a topic of enslaved paths. So with that, let me introduce Professor Parker, who is going to walk us through one of his latest projects.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much indeed, Katie. After that introduction, I can only disappoint you, but I'm very glad to be here. I would like to talk about projects I've been pursuing in relation to heritage and the digital curation of heritage in South Africa. I've been pursuing this for some time, so perhaps I should update my online CV. I would like to entitle this talk Heritage, Archive, and Pedagogy, because it seems to me that it might be interesting for this particular group to think about the possibilities between these different categories and sometimes the problems that come up between them. That is exactly my topic. I will be focusing on South Africa, but I invite you to consider the implications of the same topics for any history, any particular tradition or setting that is most meaningful to yourself. So I will shamelessly pursue my South African case studies in that light. The theme photograph is from a place called Genadendal, which is about 90 kilometers east of Cape Town. It's a mission settlement. It was founded by the Moravian or Herrnhuter missionaries in the mid-1700s as a mission station from which to convert the indigenous Khoi people. That didn't last very long because the Dutch East India Company, based in Cape Town, didn't want this interference from a rival denomination, and so they closed them down. However, this Moravian church, it's called Moravian, but it's in fact a German-speaking tradition because Moravia was a German-speaking area at that time, was refounded in 1792 again as a mission station, but this time on a bigger scale. And not only was a mill built and economic opportunities made possible, but also a library and the first printing press in the history of the Cape Colony. This might be somewhat surprising. Well, this was in 1792 that the refounding took place. And when formal enslavement was abolished at the Cape in the 1830s, this well-established mission station became the place to which formerly enslaved people came. And they settled here. And here is a painting from, I think, 15 years or so after the emancipation of enslaved people. So this representation of Genadendal in the mid-19th century will show inhabitants as a mix of formerly enslaved and of indigenous inhabitants. So much for Genadendal, which will come into this picture. I would like to start by talking about heritage, just what we mean by heritage. In the case of South Africa, the curation of heritage began with San rock painting. So the initial impetus for an effort around heritage had to do with the rock paintings that exist in Southern Africa from its earliest human inhabitants, the San people, for many thousands of years. That soon became, and this was in the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, the focus changed towards the preservation of colonial architecture. And in the early 20th century, the National Monuments Council was formed. So that is to say that the first concerted effort around heritage in South Africa started with rock painting, but soon moved to colonial architecture. And that is the idea of a monument in a very European sense, of course. With the political change of the 1990s, the coming to power of a government under Nelson Mandela's African National Council, the heritage scene was reconstituted, and the emphasis on monuments was changed to an emphasis on heritage per se. And of course, meanwhile, this reflects international trends, the idea that heritage is not just monuments, which are in many ways a very European concept, and going back to Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and so on. But heritage, including intangible heritage as skills, as craftwork, as songs, as things that may not have necessarily any tangible expression. And that is exactly what the South African Heritage Resource Agency, which is the single most immediate group responsible for the curation of heritage and its the attainment of heritage status, either at provincial or at national level. That is now run by the South African Heritage Resource Agency, and they have a very up-to-date database called ASARIS. In the international picture, the UNESCO, of course very much a post-World War II institution, has given a twofold idea of heritage, that is cultural heritage and natural heritage. And in South Africa has a total of 10 of these World Heritage sites. A World Heritage status means that particular sites get international attention. They might draw a greater degree of tourism and so be involved in a great deal more economic potential than a local heritage or a provincial heritage or a national heritage site. So you see, in this sense, heritage is the coming together, the intersection of history, of politics, of identities, of tourism. And it has enormous economic implications which may or may not be realized. In the post-1994, that is the post-apartheid phase, the nation building has been the main goal of heritage undertakings by the ANC-led government. And this has certainly involved a certain degree of political triumphalism. That is to say that the ANC-led organizations have emphasized the struggle against apartheid as the main story to tell. Okay? And I will show some examples in a minute. On the other hand, it seems to me that the sense of heritage in South Africa often involves a great deal of ethnic particularism. That is to say that the term heritage is used by a group of people that might be quite a small group that identifies itself in a certain way and uses the term heritage to keep others out in a certain degree, even if it's symbolically. So I'm suggesting that the term heritage is one that answers many needs for many different agendas, and it seems like one word, but it's understood and it's expressed, it's articulated, it's realized in many different ways. And here, for example, this is a high apartheid heritage, as it were, and this is the most famous or infamous monument in South Africa, in a sense, the Voortrekker Monument, the single largest, certainly, articulation of the apartheid ideology. It's just outside the city of Cape Town. Notice that the Heritage Foundation uses only its Afrikaans name, even on the English website, the Erfenis Stichting. And here is the Erfenis Centrum. That is a substantial library and archive of white Afrikaner nationalist heritage. So here is one expression of heritage that continues in the present day with very strong and direct roots to the 20th century apartheid past. Contrast the ANC branded approach to heritage. The National Heritage Council, its purview sometimes overlaps a little bit with the South African Heritage Resource Agency, but it has a very different function. It's the National Heritage Council that holds all the money, and so that is where you have to go to apply for funds. If you have a heritage project within South Africa and you want government funding for it, the National Heritage Council gives or doesn't give you the money. Your project would have to conform to the criteria of the National Heritage Council. As this suggests, this organization quite closely reflects the priorities and the purview of the ANC-led government. here is another expression of heritage. It's not, it doesn't have the direct government sanction, but it has much of the same, perspective. Something called the National Heritage Monument was funded by different government agencies, and somebody had the idea of telling the story of South African history in 100 statues. And these statues would be lined up, they would all be walking in a certain direction, and this was the Long March to Freedom, so-called. These statues were commissioned from South African artists. You can get obviously the reference to Nelson Mandela's memoir, Long Walk to Freedom. This was recently moved to a rather unprepossessing location outside Cape Town. I guess the background view of the mountain is great, but on the one side you don't see here the N2 highway, the road between Cape Town and Johannesburg, and on the other side you see a large shopping mall, neither of which can be said to be the perfect location for anything like a profound reflection on South African past. Nonetheless, the message is clear. Here is South African history expressed in 100 statues, and you can go and take a photograph with your favorite hero. These struggle heroes were selected with a very particular political agenda. There are all kinds of people who never set a foot in South Africa, such as Che Guevara, who are here, but who are considered to be spiritually part of the struggle against apartheid. One reading of this is to think of a memorial complex of this kind as a photo opportunity. And here is the unveiling of the statue of Bishop Desmond Tutu. And look how seamlessly the bronze statue blends in with the humans who want to be photographed with this great man. Over here is Dali Tambo. He is famous for a TV show, and he is also the son of former leader of the ANC, Oliver Tambo. He described this commemorative complex as the showbiz of history, and I won't comment any further on that designation, but I would compare that particular approach to commemoration with one that was not chosen by Archbishop Tutu, who was always a very self-effacing person, and this was a very different kind of commemoration. It is not figurative. It doesn't represent a human body. This is an abstract representation. This Arch for Arch, Tutu's nickname was the Arch. And so this whole idea is a pun. The structure imitates an indigenous or Khoi or San hut, and it is in the middle of Tutu's cathedral. St. George's Cathedral is right there. It's in the middle of the city. It's designed to be to withstand the attrition of urban life. This is. I love this. This is one of my favorite commemorations. It reflects the sense of humor of the honoree. It is not aggrandizing. It is conceptually, it is creatively interesting. And this is one that was actually approved by Archbishop Tutu. This was, in fact, erected after his death. I'm not sure he would have approved his inclusion in this parade of heroes. He was, by the end of his life, very, very critical of the ANC government. He might very well, had he been able, he might very well have withheld permission to be included in that group. So I mention this to say that heritage can mean many different things to different people, even if it's the same person who is being commemorated. What can we say about archives? Just very little. I mean archives in the first sentence, in the first sense, as a collection of historical documents. In the case of South Africa, the main ones are the National Archive in Pretoria, and for early Cape history, the Western Cape Archive in Cape Town. These are traditional archives. It's very interesting for me to notice that the term archive is now used quite loosely. I went to a book launch when I was last in Cape Town called I think it was called The Archive of Forgetfulness, and it was various people's reflections on the pandemic and the lockdown and how they dealt with that. You know, I can see the significance of that, but I note both the metaphorical turn, which is in many ways quite welcome in the use of archive, that is, a material that allows you to tell some kind of story in the future, perhaps, and the decay of physical archives, which is a very real thing. These photographs are still very painful to me. This is the university where I studied, and in the mid-1980s, this is where I went every day to the library. A fire from the nearby Table Mountain hit this particular building and caused enormous damage to unique resources at the library of the university where I studied. The university has obviously taken great steps to restore, but of course there's no doubt unique historical resources have been lost. This is what I mean by archival precarity. This is a very visible example. It was in the newspapers. What is not reported is the slow attrition when files simply disappear, when items disappear in small museums that do not have any capacity, that might not even have digitized their records. So this is the story we have heard about. It's tragic in itself. There are many, many more stories we don't hear about, and in a way, we should be even more worried about those. Pedagogy. Well, I don't need to make a case for pedagogy in this company, but I would like to ask the rather sobering question, does or should the past matter to young people today? I mean, for someone who does what I do, that's a no-brainer, but for some young people that I know, I won't mention names, that may be quite a real question. You know, why should I bother with this stuff? It's not glamorous, it's not uplifting. The objects, the histories, the activities that are part of my identity have nothing to do with the old stuff, so why should I care? That's a real question I'm suggesting. It is an issue when so many museums in South Africa, and an assistant and I counted about 400 odd when we tried to do an inventory. Many of these do not have the capacity to move to digital exhibits. As a result, their exhibits are locked in an older phase. They might involve a lot of newspaper clippings on yellowing paper stuck on pieces of soft cardboard. And if these have not been renewed since the 1970s and were glued with acid-bearing tape, they don't have much of a future. In many cases, they are the only record of many stories that have otherwise been lost and will be lost. So it also seems to me, just from my observation, that in some ways natural science museums have a different kind of appeal. And whenever I go to Cape Town, in the museum quarter around the company gardens, it's the South African Museum and its planetarium that are never short of kids on the holidays. They have holiday programs and they're full. You go there on a public holiday and you have to wait in a line to get a ticket. you go to the history museums and, you may be one of just a small number of people there. So I think this has something to do with political fatigue. That is to say that whereas a historian like myself gravitates towards the cultural and historical and social history museums, young people and their teachers find and perhaps easier context to use natural history museums, where items that are being studied, certainly in biology or geology, are often represented in museums. So I suggest that there are many questions here, and the challenge is what digital resources might do to address this situation. Here at the McGregor Museum in Kimberley, when I visited last year, I was delighted to see a group of young kids there, and to think that this is the same place where Cecil Rhodes, during the South African War, during the siege of Kimberley, where he took refuge. And so this is a striking contrast this is the same building. You just go through the door, and in fact, yeah, you can see those are the windows there that are over there. So this is the same building in Kimberley. So it seems to me that in a South African context, museums have a lot of potential to engage with students. That potential is far from realized. And here, this is a little bit of a look inside the McGregor Museum. Here is a recreation of what it might have looked like at the time that Rhodes and others were trying to shelter in place during the siege of Kimberley. And here is a natural history exhibit in the same museum. This is the Whale Well, no doubt a holiday program. And if it seems to me that, and I just suggested that nature does better than culture in the museum sector, there are other scholars who have thought that. Lynn Meskel, in her book, The Nature of Heritage, made exactly that point in rather different ways. So I would like to just give a few examples of what I've been trying to do as interventions in this space that I've just outlined. I've been creating with a colleague in South Africa called Paul Weinberg a portal called Engaging Archives. It's not yet public because some rights and permissions have to be cleared and so on. And I'd like to give just minimal examples of first of the people that we've been covering, and then talk a little bit about the objects, because it's here that I'm very interested in the idea of museum storytelling. So just very briefly, in order to make what is pretty much a museum without walls around First Peoples, we've been able to collect photographic archives from people that have spent time living with the indigenous San people in the deserts of Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, and making ethnographic films. Obviously, the enormous concerns that certain considerations are followed within the making thereof. So we want credible sources for those. There are plenty of less admirable examples of representations of First Peoples. I can't go into details on that right now. There are other projects as well. Many people have been fascinated by rock paintings. Rock paintings have an enormous, command a lot of interest in their own right, actually. And so I'm certainly not doing any new work in those areas, but I'm trying to support people that are, and I'm trying to support them by giving a digital presence to work that may not already be digitally available, and certainly not reaching learners in schools. That's the kind of contribution that I do hope to be able to make. And equally with the history of slavery in South Africa, it was under the Dutch that enslavement was a source of labor from Southeast Asia, from India, from Madagascar, and from Mozambique in the period, say, 1658 to the 1830s. This history of slavery is not embraced in South Africa. It's not an attractive prospect for anyone to claim enslaved descent, nor is it attractive for anyone to claim that they were slaveholders. As a result, and also for political reasons, because the history of slavery is very much something of the Western Cape, whereas the political heartland of the government since 1994 has been in the North. There have been many reasons why the history of slavery has not been pursued. I've tried to intervene in that by using legal trials. Well, again, using other people's research, but repackaging it for a more available use, and even creating stage plays out of court trials to make it easier to understand what's going on within this, to bring these histories to life, really. I've spoken about this separately, so I won't dwell on that. But let me talk a little bit, as I wind up, about museum storytelling and what seems to me an enormous area of potential in South Africa and perhaps elsewhere too. It is admirable to see that a small number of museums, including the Togreers Museum in Ceres, have been very dedicated to broadening the perspectives of stories told. When the museum was set up in the apartheid era, it told the story of white Afrikaner settlers who traveled in a distinctive kind of ox cart, of which this seems more like a buggy cart. But anyway, so this museum, even though it's quite a small museum, a small regional museum, has done a good job of changing its story, transforming the narrative told away from the old narrative, and yet maintaining the granularity of individual experience. Okay, there are a lot of museums, including the largest museum, or the museum in the country that has a bigger budget than all the other 400 odd together. That is a museum that tells a macro story of South Africa. It's sanctioned by the government, but it does not have it doesn't breathe with the lives of the people whose stories are supposedly told therein. Well, then we have something like this. The Togreers Museum, despite its origins in the apartheid past, has transformed to the telling of a broad range of stories. This is a very successful local initiative. And I just want to note that the South African Museum Association has a map showing many different regional museums or local museums. And it's become clear to me that the story of South Africa looks very different if you see it from Prince Albert or from Riversdale, as opposed to Johannesburg or one of the other big cities. So I'm very interested in telling stories with and through museums, especially smaller regional museums, which I believe can give a much richer account of South African past and the experiences of a wide range of South Africans. Command Tab, is that right? Here's a project that I've done with the help of students in the to tell a story about Robben Island using open access digital material. And so here we're telling the story in a series of episodes, and we are able to use Google Earth to tell this story. I know this is a seasick effect, but then so is the ferry ride from Cape Town to Robben Island. I think you can get the idea of what I'm trying to do and what my student has helped me to do. To tell a story of Robben Island, not just the 17 years of Nelson Mandela's presence there. Those are 17 very important years in the history of Robben Island. But I'm very aware of the need to tell a broader story of Robben Island. This is a place that was a convict colony for centuries beforehand. It was a hospital, it was a leper colony. A fuller range of stories can and should be told, and this is just a stub, but it shows what can be done. We were not able to obtain permission from the Robben Island Museum to do our own photography, and so the only thing we could do was by publicly available material. So let me go back, to this. Yes. So there are a lot of stories to be told by Robben Island. I'm suggesting that by using digital material, we can broaden the frame and tell a rich story with many different perspectives. I would like to end with a story of an ethnomusicologist, Dr. Sazi Dlamini, who is very interested in a particular kind of instrument, and we'll look at that in a minute. And so this has been there's a short clip of a documentary Paul and I were able to make, telling the story of this kind of music. It's a very different kind of story. It has nothing to do with enslavement or First Peoples, but it's an embracing of the wide range of South African past. And both Paul and I happen to be interested in music, hence and Dr. Dlamini happened to be available. So it's a complete happenstance that we were doing this. There already are two substantial museums of musical instruments in South Africa, and eventually we would like to link this documentary with digital material that go to the museums themselves with a collaboration of those museums. We haven't done that yet, but a website can help us to do that. Oops. So yes, here is just a short extract from the film.
I have a great interest in Zulu indigenous music, its idioms and its relation to the culture of the Zulu. And I have attempted as best as I can to incorporate its musical essences and its sensibility in aspects of my engagement with different kinds of music. This bow is one of a calabash resonated bows that are used by Amazulu. Those are the Zulu-speaking Nguni, with which Maskandi is readily associated with.
Okay, so that's a sample of the short documentary on Maskandi music by one of its leading exponents. I'm suggesting that this will be an item that I'll be very proud to display in our digital museum under the rubric of music. And so to wrap up, I would like to leave you with the thoughts that in the work that I've presented today, it seems to me that heritage, in a meaningful sense, can be very fruitfully and creatively combined with existing archives. A heritage, I should have mentioned earlier, could either have a backward-looking sense of, preserving stuff that's of significance to somebody, or it could have a forward-looking sense. The idea that heritage is something that is an intervention, almost an activist intervention in a way, difference between an archivist and an activist definition of heritage. That seems to me a fruitful duality, but one that can be creatively combined with the kinds of digital experiments that I have been playing with. In particular, I would like to suggest that the kinds of digital assets that I've shown have a lot of potential to engage audiences, both school learners and others. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, we'll have some time for Q&A with Grant. So if you want to raise your hand, I can come give the mic to you.
Thank you. Professor Parker, this is fantastic. Did you call it dabbling in trying to recover culture?
Thank you.
It's good work. I'm wondering how you've thought about the community you need to deliver these objects to learners. How are you thinking about your interpreters, your docents? How are you thinking about the infrastructure needed to actually get from your files to little culture learners' brains?
Wow, I wish there were an easy answer to that. The first step that I'm taking, well, you know, for some years, with those museums that have an education officer, that's my first port of call. And in some cases, I have a good relation with the education officer, but a rather difficult one with the museum director. Yes, those education officers, some of which have been wonderful partners, they allow me to understand the agenda of a particular museum or a museum group and to support their projects. Because if they already have a certain kind of program, then it would be great if the assets that I could help create supported an already existing program. So that's the one thing. Another effort that is just starting now and is to partner with a colleague who teaches foundational level teachers, okay, at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. And the idea is that when those learner teachers go out on their placement, and in fact their placement involved many of the places that I showed in that map. When they go out on that placement, those trainee teachers have a museum, a local museum assignment. And they don't have to curate something. They're not asked as a first effort to create something for a museum, physical or otherwise. They're simply asked to become familiar with that museum in advance, in person, and as an afterward reflection. The hope is that when those trainee teachers go back to the same locations later in the same year, they may be able to take on a more complex version of the same project. So that's experimenting with the desire to engage, to get the trainee teachers to see local museums as a source of resources. In many of the smaller towns in South Africa, resources are very, very thin on the ground. There are large classes, very few resources in a small town, and many of them, you know, struggle with just the basic infrastructure. It seems to me a win-win situation if schools are familiar with what the local museums offer. The museums would benefit from the traffic, the instructors would benefit from having those resources. there. What I can try to do by speaking to as many constituents as possible is to create the resources. For example, in the Wellington Museum, there's a collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts, and ancient Egypt comes up in grade 5 in South Africa. And so if we can create grade 5 level material using the Wellington Museum resources, that's a great, that's a boon. So I'm approaching this very difficult challenge that you've outlined piecemeal by little trials, and we're already working with the Wellington Museum as well as the trainee teachers. So we're just seeing what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's interesting to think about history in South Africa. It's a living history, and so the telling of the stories is sort of changing in real time. And I'm wondering, your last theme was pedagogy, and as community college educators, we're very committed to student-centered learning as opposed to the sage on the stage. So in terms of, you also said that nature does better than culture. The students are more likely to go to the parks than the museums. So, but like that one museum with the stories and also the instruments, it seems like the design of the space is really important and having it be interactive. So I'm wondering how you've thought about the experience of the learners, in this case children, like how do they relate the story to their own experience? How are they engaged as opposed to just hearing the stories? How do they become part of the story?
Thank you very much. This is something that we need to approach very carefully. It's a complex matter. I mean, language for one thing. I know the Tochre's Museum has done better, but in many small regional museums, you'd find only English and Afrikaans, and maybe only Afrikaans, which means that a learner that for whom neither of those is a first language doesn't have a chance of getting any benefit. In the case, the lead that the Tochre's Museum has shown is that the telling of stories by members of the community is something that can show the way forward, because that way there are many histories that are part of that, and there may, if it is someone who is in the generation of the grandparent of one of those learners, it would be easier for that young learner to connect with the histories told in that space if they can identify more directly with the teller of that story. So one thing is diversity of voices, close attention to language. The technological aspect beyond that is unfortunately very tricky, because I can talk to people about websites here in Silicon Valley, but setting up a space so far away, that's a whole other issue, because I can say, yes, let's work on the disposition of this exhibit or whatever, and the person that runs the museum says, well, we are worried about the pipe system needs to be replaced. Or I've lost 3 curators the last year, and they won't give me new staff. So what very often happens is that whatever little fine-tuning I would like to do for pedagogic purposes that I've dreamt up in the comfort of Stanford campus are pretty piddling compared to the immediate needs, even the existential questions faced by museum curators. So that is a very sobering consideration when I try to do any of these things.
Thank you for coming today. My question is, as a community college professor, who's very interested in globalizing my curriculum. I think all of us are interested in that. To a great degree, if any of this digital archives are available to me, that I can go on and link this to my curriculum, to my student syllabus, because I think obviously education is just essential, not just learning about our own history, our own heritage, but learning about the people's heritage in South Africa or anywhere.
Thank you very much. I take that as an invitation to connect, because the problem I have is that even though our team has already created significant resources for Cape slavery, that has no place even in the South African curriculum. Can you believe it? What we're hearing time and again is that teachers at South African schools, and this would come probably the 10th grade, they say we have such a packed core curriculum determined by the state, we can't get to this material. There's no time for it. And as a result, in order to trial the material around Cape slavery, I'm working with a colleague to put on a 3-day standalone course in Stellenbosch, hosted by Stellenbosch University. But we've had to put this on outside of the curriculum, having given up on trying to integrate it into the curriculum, which is rather sad. If you think this is the history of an untold history of the very learned who we're trying very hard to reach. And so if you can give me suggestions from a US point of view of which topics or which approaches are most useful, then we can meet halfway, because I'm very anchored thus far, for reasons I hope are clear, in South African past. That has no obvious place, perhaps, in US curriculums beyond particular rubrics such as world history or human rights or whatever the case may be. But that's where I need to learn from you.
I would also argue that this could lead to some level of international funding. That's somewhat, we moved from the political orientation of the archives in South Africa, because it seems to me there's a very political heavy hand operating with regard to the archives and what they want or what they don't want to be presented. And funding is an essential aspect of what you're trying to do here with regard to support of the archives.
Indeed, thank you.
So hi, Professor Parker. I think two-part questions. It's a wonderful presentation, by the way, and having us think about archiving our history. The first question, I think, is having you think about the future here. How is generative AI going to change your field, your landscape, in the next 10 years or beyond, whatever you think, or maybe thinking of? And number two, thinking of, I think, what we're just talking about. You know, there's a big emphasis within our system about equity and decolonization of curriculum. And of course, that gets into the political. And so what are your thoughts about, obviously, how to present this in not just in an objective way, but really that speaks to our more diverse students that we teach, right? Clearly, as already been asked, how do we make it much more student-centered? But I think there's something to be said about how do you orient that in a way that is from an equity lens. So I didn't know if you've thought about that. I know as community college professors, we're always thinking about that. Thank you.
The generative AI thing is tricky. Many of the histories that I've been most involved with, especially indigenous and enslaved histories, it's very, very problematic to do some kind of play acting around enslaved history. I mean, this came up in the curriculum design that I'm discussing, this very week with a partner in South Africa. And I guess that may be one kind of thing that generative AI would do. So at this point, I really am at a loss. I keep wondering what can be done. I mean, I can think more of archival material that is getting AI to recognize handwriting in documents, for example, and making documents searchable, but that's more on the research level. I honestly, for all my efforts thus far, I've come up with nothing. So if you or anyone else has any suggestion, I'd be very happy to hear them. In the matter of decolonization, yes, this is a subtext of everything that I'm doing with this, making less heard voices heard. Although when you asked the question, it occurred to me I hadn't used that word in my presentation, but it is implicit in the project as a whole.
Thank you. This has been really interesting. I was thinking about at the beginning how you're talking about these intangible aspects of heritage, and kind of connecting with Daya's question earlier, I'm wondering if that might be another way to get the youth interested and involved. So, for instance, having elders coming to give talks, having kids learn how to make different types of musical instruments or cook traditional types of recipes or something like that. And you talked about the funding, so I'm sure that's in the background.
Absolutely. I think those are excellent ideas, and those are things that can be done and are being done in some settings. It's very difficult for me to do anything at the local level. Even though I am from South Africa, I still have a South African passport, which I hope to be able to renew next year. We'll see. And it's hard to renew a passport these days. It's very hard for me to act at a local level. I can only do that with the help of partners. Yes, my idea was to start with a suite of projects, go public. We haven't yet gone public. I only want to go public when the overall suite reflects the goals, including that of decolonization, actually. And does so in a meaningful rather than a kind of cliche carrying way. So for me, this is still groundwork. I do hope that having some material to show, it will be possible to get new partners, to be possible to get funding. And though I don't want to go into too many details, I want to just mention that there are obstacles in this work. There are people who might say, I shouldn't be doing this work while based this far away on the other side of the world. Never mind that I am a South African citizen. There are people that say that any such work should be done by people living in South Africa in immediate discussion with South Africans. That's a problem I'm going to face. And I expect that. So I better have an answer ready. Nonetheless, it's been very clear to me that with the funding I've been able to scrape together, that there's a great deal that I can do. And it really started with telling the story of enslavement, realizing that the enslaved pasts are very much they're all over the Western Cape. And yet that is kept from view in a way that's either conscious or it's in perhaps more powerfully subconscious. There's a repression of those memories. Indigenous past, that's a very different thing. It's since the end of apartheid, it's been more expedient to claim those identities. So yes, where was there's a great deal that can be done on the ground. I can only do that with partners in South Africa. I have many partners in South Africa, but I need even more to do the particular things that I need, that I'm seeking to do.
Along the lines of internationalizing the curriculum, theme of the day, I was struck by the number of overlaps, accidental or not, I think not too accidental, in the dates on your first slide and some of the subsequent ones, starting with the fact that the portrait was 1849. Don't have to explain that one, but the down at the bottom, 1834, emancipation of enslaved, roughly corresponding to the collapse of the Spanish Empire, Mexico's independence, and the formal abolition of slavery in this place called California, etc. So I guess my question would be, here we are, by the way, in a missionized building with all of its kind of creepy overtones. One question is, have you thought about the resonances between, it might be completely accidental, you're the expert in South African history, but I would suggest that those resonances are not accidental. And I would also suggest that along the lines of internationalizing the curriculum, sometimes the way to motivate local historians is to tell them the truth, which is your local history has complete international resonance, right? And so that exploring some of these kind of globalized connections might be an interesting way, not only to seek funding, but also to motivate local partners to see how deeply important what they experience at a local level is on an international level then and now.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you very much. I'd love to follow that up in practice. Yes, I'm aware from the point of history books, but what this means in terms of the way people learn, what they prioritize in syllabi and classes, that is a very open question for me. Yeah, and I should admit, probably if anyone, are there any South Africans in the audience? Okay, because if there were a South African that were from anywhere other than Cape Town, they would, I would be outed right away as, Cape-centric. We Cape Townians are famous for our provincialism. So even though it might seem a little bit surprising, there's a natural default to the stories, the histories that are most meaningful for me personally as a Cape Townian and a South African. There's an exceptionalism of South Africa within African history that's a huge problem, and this is an obstacle. This is an obstacle from being able to say this is the core issue. It plays out in this way here, and it plays out in that way there. And you, learner, can gain a great deal by working through that comparison. There's a lot that can be done on those lines. I haven't even begun to do that. Thank you.